What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Make sure to subscribe below if you have not already. But either way, I really appreciate you being here. We are going to take a quick break from Rodgers Watch today to discuss a little bit more about the first round of the NFL draft. Before I get there, I know everyone is on pins and needles about this entire Aaron Rodgers situation. Everyone is extremely passionate about it. What should happen? How much should Green Bay get in return? A lot of good conversation, a lot of good conjecture. But the recent most up-to-date news that we have is from Diana Russini, who basically said that there's optimism within the Jets building that they are on the brink of landing Aaron Rodgers. I do think this is something that could be an alert at any given second. I do think that this is something that could be, up until the final whistle right before the start of the new year. I do think both of these teams, including Aaron Rodgers, is just beneficial for everyone to get this done before the start of the new league year so that everyone knows how to proceed through the remainder of this offseason, this free agency period, the draft, etc. So it does seem like a decision has to come soon, but this is a very delicate situation. You've got a 4-time MVP, Hall of Fame quarterback, a team that's desperate for a quarterback, a team that's in this very interesting phase of potentially transitioning to their future quarterback in Jordan Love, and it is just extremely delicate. You have to work out whether or not Rodgers wants to play. Is he going to retire? You have to work out what's next for Jordan Love. You have to figure out a lot of different things, right? So this is very delicate, and there's going to be some things that are going to have to, dot every I, cross every T, and make sure that this is making sense for all parties involved. So it could take just a little bit. One thing that I wanted to go over before we get into our topic for today, which is very related, is that Jets number 13 pick. And as I've said, I'm not going to go over it again, but just be cautious of what you expect in return. That being said, I would be very surprised if Green Bay isn't picking 13 overall if Aaron Rodgers does go to the New York Jets. Now, as I mentioned, it would be great if they could just get pick 13 overall, and that would be really the main piece of this deal, and that could very well happen. I don't necessarily expect it to happen, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. That being said, even if it isn't, there, as I mentioned yesterday, is also a world where maybe it's pick 13 for Aaron Rodgers and a third-round pick. And by all means, take all of Green Bay's third-round picks. We don't know what to do with them anyway, so maybe it's something like that. And that could potentially be something that takes place, and you still get that 13th overall pick. You're not giving up exact first-round compensation for Aaron Rodgers. You're getting a third back in return. That could be something that maybe makes sense. But even if it's something where it's more compensatory, or maybe it's more player involved, or maybe it's just a second-round pick, whatever it may be, I do very much expect Green Bay to ask to, at minimum, swap those picks, meaning the Jets would get pick 15, the Packers would get pick 13, and Green Bay does move up 2 slots in the draft. I think that is something that Brian Gutekunst at minimum should make sure that is involved in that deal. So even if they can't come to an agreement where they get number 13 overall, just flat out, straight out, and they can't find a way to pry that from the Jets, and maybe it's, like I said, mostly based on what happens, and it's more of a pick that goes into next year's draft, all that's possible, but Green Bay should very much, at minimum, be making sure that they swap up to pick 13. So I'm hoping, if this does come to fruition, that at worst, Green Bay is picking 13th overall in this draft, but as of right now, Green Bay is set to select number 15 overall. Maybe everything falls apart. Maybe Aaron retires. Who knows what could still happen at this point. But assuming Green Bay is selecting in the top 15 of the draft, and there could always be trade ups, there could always be trade downs. You never know exactly what's going to happen. But what I wanted to take a look at today is maybe not so much, and we're going to go over players for sure, but maybe not so much as like, all right, let's go through a mock draft and see who Green Bay will end up with at pick 13 or pick 15, but more of what positions is Green Bay most likely to end up with in this draft, whether it be pick 13, whether it be pick 15, or whether it be that they have both selections, right? So let's go position by position and see what positions could make sense for Green Bay. And let's start off with the elephant in the room, and that's quarterback, right? I think Green Bay is going to be in a great position here, meaning that there's 4 potential top 10 quarterbacks in this draft, and Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and Will Levis. All of them are extremely interesting. I enjoy all 4 of these to some capacity, but it would be extremely difficult and a very hard pill to swallow if you trade away Hall of Fame quarterback to go to Jordan Love, and then you select a quarterback with pick 13 or pick 15 or whatever pick in the first round that you ultimately end up with. That would be a very tough pill to swallow. Now, If Rodgers is gone, I very much expect Green Bay to select a quarterback in this draft at some point, but in the first round would be really tough optics. And like I said, would be a very tough pill to swallow. It would be brutal on Jordan Love. Just from a pure, like, he finally gets the reins to the team and now there's another guy looking over his shoulder. That's tough. And it would just be tough even from like a fan standpoint, right? Like, you don't want to see Rodgers go and what you use with that pick is another quarterback after you've already spent a first rounder on Jordan Love. And that's with me really liking all four of those quarterbacks. So there is a very good chance, just for me personally, if any of these four quarterbacks are on the board at pick 13 or 15, wherever Green Bay's picking, that they're probably my highest player on the board. Not necessarily Green Bay specific, but just in my general board of who I think are the good players in this draft. And even me, I'm not, and even somebody who, like me, believes that quarterback is the most important position in sports and you should always put a lot of chips into that specific position. I just don't think you can do that. The good news is that as of right now, there's a very good chance that all four of those quarterbacks go in the top 10, which if you are picking pick 13 or pick 15, that means four quarterbacks are off the board. And that could mean that if you're at pick 13, you get the ninth best player at worst that's on your board from a positional standpoint, which is pretty darn good. You're basically getting, in all likelihood, a top 10 player on your board. Even if you're at pick 15, right? At worst, it's a 11th, best pick on your board. And with that in mind, right, like, there's probably somebody that got taken ahead of you. So you're probably getting a top 10 player on your board that's not a quarterback, even if you're at pick 15. So I think this is playing out very well for Green Bay, that all four of these quarterbacks are likely to go ahead of them. And even if one is still on the board by some chance, to me, there's just 0% chance that Green Bay can go in that direction. So we are going to wipe that off the table. And I do not think Green Bay will end up with a quarterback in round one. I don't think that's going to be a hot take, but let's move that position to the side. Next up is running back. And this is an extremely interesting one because Bijan Robinson is one of the most entertaining, flashy, spectacular running backs that's come out of college football, probably since Saquon Barkley. And I think that's probably a fair assessment. Christian McCaffrey recently, like, there's certainly been some good running backs that have gone early in recent drafts, but this is probably the best one since Saquon, right? He does everything. He is a dynamic runner out of the backfield. He has a variety of moves at his disposal, can make people miss with absolute ease, can catch the ball extremely well out of the backfield. He is so fun to watch, extremely talented. Like I said, one of the best running back prospects, probably the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley. That said, he's a running back. And picking a running back when you are in need of overall talent on your team, and just picking a running back that early in general is usually not best practice, right? It's a really tough pill to swallow no matter how talented that running back is. It's usually not the best way to build your franchise and your team. Just isn't. As talented and as fun as he is, and he would be a fun player in Green Bay, him and Jordan Love could be very fun for a long time. That's a tough pill to swallow, right? So add on top of that you've brought Aaron Jones back for this year. You still have A.J. Dillon under contract. And to be fair, Jones and Dillon could both be gone next year. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But to put a top 15 pick into the running back position when you do have those two guys on your roster, and yeah, I cannot see that happening, right? I can't see Green Bay valuing it that much. This is a very stacked running back draft. They're going to have opportunities to pick running backs in the later rounds that are going to be able to help them in some capacity. I very much, again, think that Green Bay will take a running back in this draft. I just don't think it's going to be Bijan Robinson, and I don't think it is going to be in the first round. So we're going to put that one to the side as well, which brings us to wide receiver. A few interesting options here. Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnson, Jalen Hyatt, all potentially in that mix around pick 15, right? Some of them could go well later. That's possible. Some of them maybe could go earlier. But there is a real legitimate chance that when Green Bay gets on the board at pick 15, if that's where they're selecting, that no wide receivers have been taken yet. And that Green Bay could get the top wide receiver on the board. And this is absolutely a position that Green Bay could go with here. There have been rumors that Green Bay is very interested in Jalen Hyatt. Quentin Johnston absolutely fits their usual profile and exactly what they like at wide receiver. Smith-Njigba is a perfect fit to go along with Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. Those two on the outside, Smith-Njigba in the slot. He is a route running extraordinaire. He can get off of, basically he's a walking first down. Anytime he's on the field, if you need 10, 12 yards, 3rd and 10, 1st and 10, 3rd and 8, 2nd and 6, it doesn't matter. Like, have him run a route past the first down. He will get open. You can get him the ball, and he is an absolute weapon. One of the smoothest wide receivers that I have seen come out in some time. He is not, in my opinion, Justin Jefferson, but he might be the most smooth prospect coming out since Justin Jefferson. Very fun wide receiver. And then Jordan Addison. I see a lot of Greg Jennings in Jordan Addison as well. And he didn't test the best, which is going to make things difficult. But these are 4 very interesting wide receivers, and all 4 very well could be on the board when Green Bay picks at pick 15. So that is very much an option. Would Green Bay actually go wide receiver round 1? That would remain to be seen. I know there will be a lot of, how should I say it? There will be a lot of wry smiles and raised eyebrows, I'll put it that way. If as soon as Aaron Rodgers is off the team, Green Bay spends a first-round pick on wide receiver, I'm sure that'll be very interesting to some people. But it is a legitimate possibility just on how this draft is sort of flushing out and potentially what could actually be on the board for Green Bay based on what they need, what they could get, what's available, etc. So all 4 of those wide receivers could be in play, and all of them very much a possibility for Green Bay. So wide receiver, I'm going to X off quarterback, I'm going to X off running back, wide receiver, very much in play at pick 15 for Green Bay. That brings us to tight end. And there's a few options. I don't think Musgrave is going to be in the conversation that high, not out of the realm of possibility entirely, but that would be pretty rich. But Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, Darnell Washington, depending on where you look, are very much in the discussion from around that standpoint. And 3 very different tight ends. Michael Mayer is your overall tight end. You see some real flashes from him that make him at times look like Travis Kelce. He is a blocking tight end, though, on top of that. He, as a freshman, started dominating at the tight end position at Notre Dame and really never stopped since. There are times where he disappears from the game and you kind of forget that he's there, but then you watch him run a route and get open in the end zone and you're like, oh, wow, like that looks like Travis Kelce. Like it is crazy at times. So he's a very talented overall tight end. Dalton Kincaid is more of your receiving tight end. I see a little bit of like prime Zach Ertz in his game. That may not be like 15th overall pick, what you're sort of thinking of, but he is a very special receiving tight end, very soft hands, can get open over the middle, run after the catch ability. What a lot of teams are looking for these days is exactly the type of Dalton Kincaid tight end. So he could potentially be in play. And then Darnell Washington is such an interesting case study. He is going to come in and help your team immediately. He's going to be your 6th offensive lineman. He's going to help you in the red zone. He's an absolute beast. He tested through the roof when it came to his athleticism, basically only behind Jackson Smith and Jigba when it came to the agility drills, which is insane for a 6'7", like 270 pound, I want to say, tight end. Like just an incredible athlete. You're starting to hear some Gronk comparisons for for him and for Darnell Washington, I should say. I don't see that. I see a younger, more explosive Mercedes Lewis is what I see. And you might be thinking again, like 15th pick overall seems a little bit rich for that. Yeah, there's maybe some truth to that, but he's going to play for you for a decade, be a dominant blocking tight end, be your 6th offensive lineman, and he's going to literally help everything on your offense. He can get open. He can, we've seen him leap, hurdle players, one-handed catches. He's going to be a beast in the red zone. There's a lot of value with him. He can be your H-back. He can be a fullback. He can do so many things for your team. Very, very interesting prospect. If I had to guess, I don't think Green Bay goes tight end in this situation because I do think there's going to be tight ends available in the 2nd round that are going to be very talented as well. That being said, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I would put wide receiver as more likely ahead of the tight end position at this point. Which brings us to maybe the most likely position overall, and that is offensive line. And there are 4 offensive linemen that could go around this point. Peter Skoronski, Darnell Wright, Paris Johnson, and Broderick Jones. Now, full transparency, haven't had a chance. I've watched everyone on this list today except for Darnell Wright. Have not had a chance to break him down entirely yet. Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson, and Broderick Jones, I love all 3 of them. I would be beyond thrilled with any of those picks. And you might say, well, they've got Yash, they've got Zach Tom, they've got Bakhtiari. We just talked about yesterday. Yash, Bakhtiari, it's not a lead pipe block that they could be on the roster of the season. I think it's extremely likely. But even as you go into next season, right, we don't know what Zach Tom's long-term position is. We know that David Bakhtiari is at best like winding down his career probably in some capacity. The injury issues are a major red flag, even though Brian Gutekunst and company are saying that those injuries are behind him. You can never quite know for sure. And Green Bay's going to have a massive opportunity to get off of his contract next year and have a ton of savings if they did want to go in that direction, or if he has some sort of setback this upcoming year. It's just hard to trust a player that's had those injury issues as much as I love David Bakhtiari. And then, like I said, Zach Tom, you don't know what position. Yosh Nijman will be an unrestricted free agent, even if he's back on the 1-year restricted free agent tender this year. So yes, you have Caleb Jones, you've got Luke Tenuta, you've got, Rasheed Walker, but those guys are basically lottery chips. And if one of them pays off, you're happy, but there's no guarantee any of them ultimately do. So this is a real opportunity. And Skoronski makes so much sense in this situation, right? Because he has at least probably 4 position versatility: left tackle, left guard, right tackle. I think you potentially play all 4. And in the meantime, if you've got Bach at left tackle, Jenkins at left guard, Runyon at right guard, you could play Skoronski at right tackle. If you're not sold on Josh Myers, like I'm not, you could move Elton inside to center, put Skoronski at left guard. So it's Bach, Skoronski, Elton Jenkins, John Runyon Jr., and Zach Tom. That sounds like a really fun offensive line. You still have Yosh Nijman and Josh Myers as depth pieces in that situation. Like, you are in very good hands. And then if Bach does leave, if Yosh does leave, you potentially have, Skoronski at left tackle if he can play that. If not, you could play Zach Tom potentially at left tackle. If that doesn't work, Elton Jenkins long-term could, move out to left tackle. So you're giving yourself, with Jenkins' versatility, Skoronski's versatility, and then Zach Tom's versatility, plus Josh Myers can play both guard spots. Myers might be able to play center or both guard spots. Like, you are giving yourself a lot of options with Skoronski moving forward. But if it's Darnell Wright, Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, like I said, I love Johnson and Jones. I think both of those would be phenomenal picks. And then if I know a lot of people have Darnell Wright ahead of Johnson and Jones, if that's the case, like I said, I already love the other two. If Wright's anywhere near as good, he'd be a pretty darn good pick for Green Bay as well. So I'm excited to watch him, but this is very, very much a position that is in play for Green Bay. Defensive lineman, it's probably one guy and one guy only, and that's Jalen Carter. Brzee would be probably a little bit rich at that point, but not entirely out of what Green Bay likes to do. Brzee is a height, speed, weight, athletic freak. All right, that checks the box. Still young, checks the box. Major conference, checks the box. Or I should say major school, more like with Clemson, but that checks the box. And high-end high school recruit coming out, checks the box. Didn't exactly produce in college, checks the box. There's a lot of Rashawn Gary to Brian Brzee when you look at his overall profile, right? So that maybe wouldn't shock me if Green Bay went ultra aggressive and went in that direction. Jalen Carter's the other interesting one here. There are people saying now that he will drop out of the top 10 and he could potentially go in that 12 to 15 range. If that's the case, Green Bay's going to have to consider it. The issue is that if the top 10 teams drop Jalen Carter off their board, the team that's most likely to drop Jalen Carter off their board is probably the Green Bay Packers, right? So if he gets past the top 10, there's probably some major red flag that Green Bay, of all teams, is probably not willing to overlook. So while they would have to consider it, and that would be a very interesting situation, we know he's from Georgia, high-end athletic freak, still very young. Like, he hits everything else. But if there is that literal question mark that other teams aren't willing to take him ahead of pick 15, I question if Green Bay would be the team that would ultimately take him off the board and put him as a member of the Green Bay Packers. That brings us to edge. Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith, and Myles Murphy all could be opportunities here to draft. That being said, Anderson and Tyree Wilson very much likely to be gone in the top 5, maybe top 6, 7 at worst. Lucas Van Ness is the very, very classic Green Bay Packers pick here. I've talked about him in the past. Can set the edge, can bull rush, is extremely athletic, extremely talented, still super young, not a ton of reps on his body of work. He's like the classic Green Bay Packers selection. We know Rashawn Gary coming off a torn ACL. Preston Smith probably winding down his career in Green Bay. This very well could be his last year in Green Bay. You've got Enigbari is probably a depth piece, probably your number 3 edge rusher long term. So this is still a very much position of need, especially with Rashawn Gary potentially not being ready to start the season as well. So Lucas Van Ness would not shock me. Nolan Smith has that Georgia bloodline, right? Like, he would be another bulldog on the defense. He would be very, very fun, extremely fun. He is not typically the type of edge rusher that Green Bay likes in their defense. They like the big, more physical edge rushers, but they did go with Enigbari, so maybe that's changing a little bit. But Nolan Smith would be really, really fun. Myles Murphy, to me, is more a hand-in-the-ground edge rusher, more of like I say 4-3, but I don't really necessarily mean like a 4-3 with 3 traditional linebackers, but more of your wide 9 edge rusher, speed off the edge. Doesn't seem to me like a Green Bay type, but Lucas Van Ness would probably be the one that fits where Green Bay is picking and fits their general profile, but I wouldn't totally rule out Nolan Smith in that range either. That brings us to, I'm actually going to skip corner for a second. I'm going to jump to safety. I think Brian Branch and where he tested is going to take him off of Green Bay's board that early. And yes, they need safety help, and Branch is a fun safety. he ultimately might end up just being a slot corner, which changes the dynamic as well. They could play him there, but I don't know. That just seems rich for me with Green Bay at pick 15. So I don't think it's that direction, which brings us to corner. And that gets us to Christian Gonzalez, Joey Porter, and Devon Witherspoon, 3 corner. I love Gonzalez. To me, there's a lot of Jair in his game. I love Joey Porter. And then Devon Witherspoon I really like. I wouldn't put him quite with the other two, but there's a lot to like about Devon Witherspoon's game as well. The question being is they have Jair. They spent a first on Eric Stokes. They've got Rasul. Are they going to spend another premium pick? And it's best player available, right? So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility, but that would be a little bit of a tougher pill to swallow when it comes to what they currently have on the roster, what they need, and what they want to spend another premium pick on. There's a part of Packer fans, right, that are going to be like, you're spending another premium pick on a defensive back? Like Quentin Rollins, Demarius Randall, Josh Jones, Josh Jackson, Jair Alexander, Darnell Savage, Eric Stokes. And I feel like I'm missing like 13 other ones, right? We can go back to Clinton Dix. And like, there's been so many defensive backs that Green Bay has selected in the first 2 rounds of the draft. Like selecting another one here, this time in the top 15, it just feels like you got to be able to win at corner with the guys that you have with Rasul and Stokes and Jair already. And yes, best player available, but Witherspoon, Gonzalez, Porter would seem like a little bit of a luxury pick for based on where this roster is at right now. And I'm just not sure Green Bay can do something like that. They might be more conducive to trading back if that was actually the best player that was still available on the board. So I do think that there are multiple positions they can go with. I think wide receiver, maybe tight end, offensive line, maybe defensive line, edge rusher, maybe corner would probably be some options here. Again, I don't see quarterback. I don't see running back. Defensive line, Jalen Carter, Brian Brzee, maybe, but I don't really see that all that much. Safety, I don't see. The corner one's really interesting, but again, that's really, really tough to spend another premium pick on a corner. So if I had to guess today, I think edge, offensive line, wide receiver, or maybe tight end is probably where you're looking with that first pick. So if you want to spend some extra time scouting some positions and looking at some of the, whether it's highlights online or the all 22, whatever it is you want to do, take a look at Addison and Jigba, Quentin Johnston, Jalen Hyatt, Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, Darnell Washington, Peter Skoronski, Darnell Wright, Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, I don't know, maybe Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith. And if you want, maybe jump into a couple of those top corners and you'd probably be pretty covered for who ultimately ends up in Green Bay with either pick 13, pick 15, or maybe, just maybe, both of those picks. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you as always. I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe we'll have Aaron Rodgers update and we'll have a lot to talk about. If not, figure out something else, I promise. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.